and I'm thrilled to be here, and I want to thank the Grand Hotel for their hospitality in hosting this. I do want to thank Paramax Films for the producing services. They always do such a great job for us. This is being streamed by Rapid TV News, and I want to thank them for being our service of transmitting this throughout the world. I also would like to acknowledge Toronto Echo and TIFF 2014 for hosting this. So this is a panel which happens to be the last panel of the day. It's on the development prospect, or as I call it, development hell, of how moving your project forward in a development phase. I want to start out by asking each of the panel members to introduce themselves and tell a little about what they do. Kim?
I'm with Entertainment Finance LLC based in Century City in Los Angeles. Generally, we finance feature films that already have funding attached, but I do have a couple of co-production projects that I'm working on that are in development.
Okay, and that's Kim Holland, Rudy Langlais, a producer. Tell us about you.
That's what I do.
Yeah, and some of the projects that you've been involved with.
I produced The Hurricane. I produced Redemption. Produced Sugar Hill. I'm producing the film about Bob Marley. I'm producing the film about Miles Davis and a few other things.
And this is Greg Rubidge. Can you tell us about you?
Sure. I'm president of Syndicado. We're a VOD distribution company. Been around for 5 years. Work with all the major digital platforms in the United States. Work with a lot of independent filmmakers. A lot of our clients are existing distributors and sales agents, and will monetize their films on new platforms around the world.
And Nancy Goodman, tell us about you.
I am an author, and my second book was a novel that I very much wanted to be a movie, and so I tried my hand at writing the screenplay, and I did, and I brought it to Corky, and he encouraged me to attend a seminar, and which I did, and then last minute decided to pitch, and in a very unprepared manner I did so, and I won. So I'm now in production in development with Rudy as my producer, which is a gift, and Corky, and I have the support of the panel that of the contest that I entered.
Okay, so Kim, again, in the development phase, how do people go through the maze of the development phase? How do they move their projects forward in the development phase?
Well, you're right, it can be a maze, especially if you're not familiar with the steps involved. Generally speaking, you have producer looking at various stories and choosing a story that they want to commit themselves to, because if you're not passionate about it and you don't see a future for it, then why are you going to spend maybe 3 to 5 years, maybe 10 years working on a particular project? And then getting maybe some initial seed money that can fund the legal for copyright and getting all the IP rights straightened out. Those are some of the initial steps, and bringing, if you have access to relationships with directors or talent, doing that, or going through a casting agent to find talent.
Rudy, how do projects find you, and how do you decide whether you want to get involved in the development phase of a project?
Well, they find me or I find them. The ones that find me through relationships, agent, writers that I work with, lawyers who may recommend something to me, filmmakers, a director, other producers who bring projects to me, and then I originate much of the things that I produce.
Greg, in the development phase, and someone's trying to develop their project and get certain monies for their project, in the development phase, how would your company or you be involved in that fashion?
At this point, probably, number of other digital aggregators, because on that side, it's not as predictable. So when things aren't predictable, it's tougher to put money against it. So I don't know many, well, we're just kind of entering the phase now in the last year where some of the digital aggregators are putting up MGs for finished products. I don't know many that are putting it at the beginning. What I have seen on the digital platforms are filmmakers use, Kickstarter, Indiegogo, everything from raising financing, funding their whole film to perhaps a certain part of it. And we had a release in the theatrical release in the United States, and the filmmakers raised all their budget for releasing in the U.S. from Kickstarter. But starting at the very beginning, at their script stage, or when you're starting a project, one of the best things about, say, using Kickstarter or Indiegogo is that you're building your audience along the way, and that they're championing you through different gates to get you. And once the film's made, they're your champions to get it out there, help word of mouth, because they backed you and they backed their project along the way. So you can use different platforms to help you along the way, and then kind of continue with the life of the film.
Yeah, as an example, you, Nancy, talked about the fact that you entered a pitch contest, and we talked earlier about the art of the pitch and things like that, and you didn't expect the pitch, and you pitched and you won. And on the panel were people like Rudy, who decided on you, and there was a distributor, and there was marketing, and there was accounting, and there was a lawyer, and there was casting. When you or we approached Ronnie Eskel first, who's a casting person, what were your thoughts about that? And did you know that there would be a cost in bringing in casting at the development phase?
I've been learning as I go.
Okay.
And there have been some surprises, and many of them good ones, I mean, when you handed that script to Ronnie and she said she loved it, I was surprised and so happy. You're excited about your own project, but you don't necessarily believe that everyone else will be. You don't know. And so I was very excited, but it wasn't really until Rudy came on that I started to think, oh boy, maybe this is really happening, And financially, I know that, your question is,
did you expect the cost factor to be what the cost factor was? That a surprise? Were you willing to put money in the development phase, and was it your own money or friends and family?
So far, it's been so far the expenses have not been so high, and so far it is my own money. And really, my feeling is until I see that I have really reputable people, I don't want to go to anybody else for financing, because why would they believe in it? The more I have attached to this, the more I can sell it.
How has Rudy helped you in the development phase? Because you're still in it.
It's immeasurable.
What has he done?
Well, what he's done is, first of all, it was a surprise that he came on, because it's not typically what he does. My story is not typical of what Rudy's done, and I did my research too, and on him, his background, and the projects that he's been involved in, and they were very impressive projects, but they weren't like mine. But he got it, he understood me, he understood why I wrote it, he understood the characters, to the point that the questions that he asks me as he's reading this, so and so, when did he fall in love with her? When did that happen? I didn't even ask myself that, And at one point he said, well, what happened here? And I said, well, it's assumed that that this is what happened. He said, no, it's not assumed. I need to see it. So he's brought so much to the story, so much richness, more depth. He's taken out pieces that he's talking about taking out pieces that we'll have to fight about, But I trust him. I trust him because he understands the story and he understands me.
Yeah, two his horn to some extent. I mean, Rudy is, as I've told you, story driven.
Yeah.
I mean, Village Voice, where he was very involved in the stories that Village Voice and to then create a magazine Spin, as he did, story driven, and his movies that he's done and been involved with were also very heavily story driven. So what did you see in her project that said, you know, there's got some worth to that project?
Well, there was a theme. There was a very powerful central character. There was a unique world. There was a quirk of plot that involved character, but essentially it was a strong character piece, driven by a very complex character trying to work out a problem. And I think that's the heart of almost all good storytelling, is a wonderful character trying to work out a very human problem.
And Kim, when you say that you bring in 50% potentially of the first 50%, if the team, and by the way, just as we've talked about in the development phase, it's very important to have team building to fill in your team, to be credible and trustworthy. So Kim, if we brought you a project that was half funded and no talent yet, but half funded, with Rudy and Nancy involved, would you take a look at it?
I would, and obviously having that equity piece is important, but also Rudy's track record would really lend to the credibility of the story, as well as Nancy's platform from the book she's published and the kind of subject matter that she's addressed.
And from a Kickstarter, and I tend to agree with you, an Indiegogo and a Kickstarter for certain types of projects is used very often to get the development money because it's the highest risk of money. So how would you advise someone who comes to you and says, I have a project, the project's about, it deals with mental illness or eating disorders or things that have social and important content, how would you recommend them going out doing a Facebook, or I mean, an Indiegogo rather, or Kickstarter campaign?
It's a good question, because I think, Kickstarter lends itself a lot to, and this is like when we first started distributing films, being a smaller player and new, we focused on documentaries because usually they have like a built-in audience.
Because it's a social issue.
Or it could be social issue, or just like, it was a medical issue, or even it was a doc on whatever, Chelties, or, anything. There's usually a core group of people that are built into it or attached to it. So, and I'll just say, like, a great case study, which you can Google and look online, is called The Indie Game. There's two independent producers from Winnipeg, and it was on Gamers, and their whole project, it just had a whole life. It was probably one of the most successful campaigns on Kickstarter for a film where an example of how they brought their audience along. So what it started out with is a lot of outreach to that core constituency if it's a documentary. If it's an independent film, it's kind of tough because you're selling an idea. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but most of our experience with it has been a doc where somebody could attach to that issue. So a little more challenging on the independent front, especially with, again, no star actors. But then there was the case, one of, I forget the actor, but he just launched a Kickstarter campaign and did it. You guys know it was
Zach Braff, you talking about?
Yeah. So I mean, it's getting out there and being more mainstream. I will go back when you say about triggering funding, what you asked me before. Things are a little different in Canada, where there's more of a publicly funded system, and now, after 5 years, they've kind of acknowledged the place that digital plays. So this Canadian Media Fund, which is this fund set up to help monetize and develop TV projects, they have, you need a broadcast letter, you need different commitments, and now digital, we'll write a letter if we like a project and can help trigger other funding, whether it's tax credits or something from a broadcaster. So digital is getting more mainstream in that, so we may not be committing funds to a project, but the system in Canada is acknowledging digital as a legitimate outlet, and we can trigger funding on that side as well.
All right, so you do view Kickstarter and Indiegogo as a possibility to get the biggest risk dollars, which are the development dollars, on certain kinds of projects.
Yeah, and I think most of it, I don't know how much would be on development. I think a lot of independent filmmakers, if they're using the Kickstarter route or it's for documentary, they're spending, they pitch the project, and they have little indie clips that they're putting up there. What they're really looking for is production funding and making it go along the way, again, right up to the different stages of release. So it may start with development where they're pitching their idea, but after that it's like we want to raise funds to start the project. And then as the story or the film evolves, maybe they go back for more money. But we've seen some independent filmmakers continue to go back to their core audience to support them, and then people have a vested interest in seeing the completion of the project.
Do all of you think that the quality and credibility of your team that you assemble has got value during the development phase? I start with you, Rudy.
Yes, I think in a measured way. The first thing for me, and it's been the working process with Kim though, is the story. Is really we took
with Nancy.
I'm Nancy. I'm sorry. With Nancy is the story. We took the bones, the architecture of it, and we disassembled it to a certain extent, and then we built back up from there in a very concentrated, measured way, really understanding every aspect of character, story, plot, element there was. We can only build a team if we actually know the story better than anybody else who's going to join the team, because we're going to be asking others to join a team that we have to explain where we're taking that team. What's the movie about? And so that's what we did, and we focused in a very concentrated way over the last several months. Now we're going to start to move to the next phase where we're going to be able to turn that over to a casting director to really now give us a rich sense of possibilities for casting, to begin to talk about the cost of the film, a line producer who's able to budget the film in a really precise way, to be able to start talking about
and all that happens,
financing.
by the way, during the development phase.
Well, we're thinking about it, but the focus really has been on getting the story right and getting it tight and getting it to the place where it's near being a producible script. Because once the team begins to be added on, then it becomes a moving train, and we don't want to have to stop to start again. So that's really what our focus has been. We've identified, some of the possible other team members that are going to come on next. But I think the team right now are the players in the script.
Well, that's a powerful statement.
And it's interesting because people who read the script felt it was ready to hand over to casting, and even people from the panel, and they worked with me a little bit. That was before Rudy came on. So when I had Rudy read the script, I was like, he's gonna love it. Well, he said, this is nowhere near ready to hand over. I mean, if we want to represent a quality project, this wouldn't be what we would do right now. So he and it's been painstaking for him, I know, because, I'm not experienced at this. And so that's why he's been so valuable to me, because before getting to the place where he would be the producer for this movie, he's had to kind of babysit this script, but that's where I really built the trust in him as a producer, because because of the way he understood it and the things that he brought and the questions that he asked me, and what the script is today. And we're not completely finished, but that's what's been exciting to me.
Yeah, well, in your world, the team matters not, right?
No, it's usually it's kind of outside the
Right.
Hollywood or the studio system. It's all driven by the filmmakers.
Okay.
Yeah, the filmmaker and the producer.
And they would bring a project to you, the filmmaker or the producer. Would they have money before they came to you? Would you help get money for them? Would you?
No, I wouldn't say I'm not, that's not our focus just yet. Like I said, they'd be coming at the very beginning to try or trigger something in the Canadian system, or they've kind of already, started their campain.
Do you concentrate mainly in Canada?
No, most of while we can trigger funding there, most of what we get is most of our distribution outlets are in the United States, just given the size of the market and the number of different outlets. We also work in Europe and Asia. We'll take a lot of things that are produced in the Canadian system and distribute it in the United States, find a new market for it, or take things that we work with in the U.S. to other markets.
Rudy, if someone that you didn't know somehow got you Kim's screenplay.
Nancy's.
I mean, Nancy's.
Identity crisis.
Okay,
I'm really feeling good about this whole thing.
No, we're trying to get to Kim so we can get it financed. So forgive us for bypassing you only for that reason.
But if someone who you didn't know got Nancy's screenplay to you, would you have read it even?
Someone I didn't know?
Right.
You mean if it had shown up unexpectedly?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah. So obviously.
And not because out of any disrespect, it's because I have so much already that I have to prioritize. I have the things that I'm immediately working on, things that are moving toward production, things that people who I work with, are expecting me to respond to. So there's a prioritization. So things that are unexpected or that come from a direction that I don't know, it sort of falls to the back of the pack.
And Kim, it is Kim, right? Okay. Kim, if and typically, I know you don't get involved in the development phase, but would your company consider getting involved with quality projects and quality teams in the development phase?
On occasion. And right now, I have actually 3 projects in development, but it's been for different reasons. One, actually, they're all co-productions in this case. One is just an amazing story, and I felt confident that I can raise money, half of the money from China, and then we can work on this side of the Pacific for the other money. And then another one is also a U.S.-China co-production, and they came to us and asked us if we would help from the development phase, and they are, committing the money to development and, half of the money for the film. So we're looking at that as well. And then the other thing that I'm looking at is working on actually producing as a documentary.
And I know that you have funding sources that in China. And I mean, and these are not fake funding. These are funding sources that you've really tapped into for funding in China. And I know that you've got funding sources in the United States.
Yes.
So you sort of marry the two usually?
Yes, I mean, for a co-production,
Yeah.
if it's U.S.-China co-production, then they want something that's going to relate to China in some way. So it's got to be a U.S. story, but also a China story. And the challenge is that it has to meet the audience demands in both markets. And sometimes that's not an easy task with that kind of a story. So, I've seen a lot of co-production screenplays, but there have only been a few, 2 in fact, that I'm really taking a close look at.
So it has to be a project that meets the co-production criteria? Or could it be a project from China that maybe couldn't show in China, but has got all the ability to show, but not in China, that you might...
The ones that we're looking at would have the ability to show in China. Otherwise, it would be pretty tough to get the Chinese investment. as part of that equation.
And you look at projects that are partially funded. I mean, basically, 50%, or even at some points 90%, just for
Generally speaking, that is what we look at, is projects that already have some of the equity attached, or they're at last stage financing. But when we're talking about these projects with development, it's because, you know, I see a promise in the story. I see that there's funding available there to help move it forward. If there was no funding there, or if I didn't feel confident that I could get funding for those particular projects, then I probably wouldn't choose to do them.
All right. She just said that she's interested in DAX. Well, how do you see then? What do you want to tell her? Because you deal in DAX, right?
I think that, I mean, we'd be delighted to look at the project. I mean, it's something offline. But I mean, coming up with a distribution plan in terms of, you know, what does it warrant? Docs are, you know, we just this year we started releasing theatrically, and I've found that, you know, we've had a great opening at the IFC, and then has traveled across the states after that. But what we're finding now, and for independent film, is a theatrical release is a marketing spend for the film on ancillary platforms, unless you're in a different trajectory. So we're looking, you know, I've had to narrow our focus in terms of what we can take on, so that we can be much more focused on the marketing side, rather than, you know, before we were starting, we took a lot of product, and for a while just getting it out there was the key goal. Now, if you know, to get the attention of the people at Apple, to get in the home, you know, in that home slot, which is everyone's fighting for on these platforms. Sometimes it's a theatrical, some people for wallet, trying to get the reviews. That's another marketing strategy. And at the very beginning, doing the festival tour, because it's like a, you know, it's like a cotillion for films. You go to all the events, it raises, you know, not only will you attract sales agents, but the you know, like at this festival, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, everybody's here, so they know and they're hearing what's out there. So it's kind of all seamless, but yeah, not seamless. It's coming together, but it's constantly evolving. We're finding from things. So it's a long way of saying, love to hear more about the project. I could perhaps, you know, suggest some specific strategies given the subject of what it's about. But okay.
So Nancy, once you plus Rudy figure out where the screenplay's going, and you all agree on the screenplay's ready, then he said it goes to casting. So what does that mean? It goes to casting.
Well, two things will happen. One is that simultaneous with casting is we'll show it to a line producer to begin to get a sense of what this script should be budgeted at, get it into a ballpark. And that ballpark will help us then also know what level of casting has to be achieved in order to support that budget. If it's a $3 million film, there's a certain level of casting that supports that. If it's a $15 million film, you need some more names in it, and maybe a recognizable name, a director. So we're going to decide on what level the movie should be budgeted at, and what level casting. And that's where Ronnie, who has had a look at this already, will come back into the picture to advise on cast. And then we'll begin the process of assembling, you know, going out to some talent, you know, showing it to directors, you know, beginning to create a finance plan for it. You know, how would we finance it if it's a $3 million film, or if it's a $5 million film? So whatever the budget is. But first we need to know, what does it cost to create this piece of work that we're working on right now.
Sorry, I actually have a question. If it's a smaller budget, if your line producer looks at the script and says, yeah, you know what, you could probably make this film for $3 million, like, why wouldn't you look for A-list talent, even if it's at a smaller budget? Like, why would you only look at A-list talent just because the budget's higher?
Because A-list talent, first, for two reasons. One is that A-list talent wants to be paid, unless you have a special relationship with them, or unless they just absolutely fall in love with the material. The fall in love with the material and the relationship tend to be the needles in the haystack.
Okay.
So you have to count on being able to pay them something of their fees. Agents tend not to want to put A-list talent in smaller movies because they make less of a commission for that, so they'd rather put their A-list talent in a picture where they're going to get $2 million versus a picture where they're doing it as a labor of love,
Right.
let's say. So you're then dealing with the gatekeepers that are involved. Now, you see A-list talent showing up in more modestly budgeted films. You know, those tend to somehow be the result of relationships. If I know an actor or several actors and I can convince them to be in my $3 million film for a modest fee, then I have gotten around the gatekeepers that want the bigger commission for putting the actors in bigger budgeted films. So it's that's part of the challenge, is getting A-list talent into smaller budgeted films. And even though actors are always saying there is a dearth of good material and we want, you know, certain kinds of pieces, when it comes down to dollars and cents, they want to be paid first and paid well, and their representatives want to be paid first and well.
And I have a definite view about that, which is not too much different than what he said. You gotta get beyond the agents somehow, because the agent doesn't want to compromise the last amount that actor has been paid for his or her role. So the ability, as he said, to get beyond the gatekeeper is a relationship of, business. Without naming names, Rudy and I are working on a project, and there's an A-list actor that he wants me to go to, that I happen to know very well, and I won't go to the agent. First of all, I can't stand the agent, but that's neither here nor there. I won't go to the agent.
That's just between us here,
Yeah,
by the way.
But the fact is that I can get, in this particular matter, I can get beyond the gatekeeper, knowing that eventually it's going to go to the gatekeeper, but the talent will say, I want to do this.
Okay.
And so it's really a major problem, because I believe actors want to act. I believe that certain representatives that they have only want them to act if the dollar is right. I think there's a contradiction in those terms, and unless we solve that core issue, he's exactly right. You aren't going to be able to get a major talent in a $3 million project unless I or he or someone on the team can get beyond the gatekeepers.
And let me add this point, that it may not be that the project needs A-list talent.
Right.
It may be B or a recognizable enough name in a particular side. It depends on the source of the financing. If we are not having to pre-sell rights, you know, in a market that depends on name, that's name driven, you know, then we have a much more wide open casting process, and in some ways you can cast better if you're not having to cast one from column A because of name in order to satisfy a sale in a particular territory. So these are all the questions that we're about to come face to face with once we know what the budget of this movie is likely to be. Then we get into the real producing process, the financing producing process anyway, which is a very interesting
What determines that? So you have your line producer read the script. What tells him the number? And which type of talent? Is it the quality of the script? Is it the marketability? Is it?
Well, it starts. This is how you're now in our working process, because this is a conversation that's coming, so we should have it
Well,
here
it's
in
the
front
development.
of it. No, I think it's a great question. The process is it's a mechanical process. What the line producer is going to do is he's going to go through the screenplay, and the script will be broken down. And it's going to be broken down into two main components. One is how many days of shooting are going to be necessary, and so there will be a schedule created. That schedule may turn out to be 30 days, let's say, just for argument's sake. The other part of the mechanics is what kind of locations and equipment. So the physical stuff of the movie, cameras, sets, cars, clothing, dress, apartments, buildings, all of that, the physical stuff of it becomes part of what will emerge in a budget. So the number of days, however, is the foundation, and the physical materials of the film, all of those taken together will give you a budget. So 30 days of shooting may cost X amount per week. We'll know that, for 30 days it's going to cost us $5 million, including all of the materials necessary. We arrive at a number. Now, once we arrive at that number, it doesn't mean that we accept that number. The line producer may show us a budget that's $8 million, and we can begin to look at how to bring that down to $7 million or $5 million. So there is a process that I engage in with the line producer at that point, where we actually go through and I say, you put too much money in this category, there's not enough here, I'd like to have another $1,000 for this category. And we go through that process until we get into a comfort zone. And then we go out into the next place, which is, okay, how do we support and finance that particular budget? What do we need to finance that particular budget? Cast, director, and financing structures that help us get to the budget for the film.
And we are seeing at Entertainment Finance independent producers coming and really making a considerable effort to reduce those costs so that they can attract the equity investor to invest, because the investors, their first question is, how am I going to get my money back once they buy into the story?
But then therefore
Yeah.
the state that they're going to spend it in has some importance to your investment.
Some, but they also want to see another equity investor
Yeah.
there to diversify the risk. And then I also wanted to comment on Rudy's response about talent. I agree that if a producer has special relationships or someone on the team has relationships, but we're seeing with a lot of the last stage financing films that come in, they may be 8 million, 6 million, 10 million, 20 million, and they have maybe 3 A-list talent there and a director, and the talent, because of some relationship, has agreed to do the film, and they've deferred some
Or
of
they've
their...
taken ownership.
They've taken ownership,
in
they're
something.
getting a percentage on the back end, or we're seeing more and more where talent is taking a producing role in addition to being in it, and that's bringing down the upfront costs.
All right.
So when you're all the talk, when you're breaking down the script, that's really a below the line cost. Now it's above the line. So I guess I don't know why a star, if you did raise money, could say it's a $2 million script, he'd pay a star or whatever. He only wants to come on for $2 million. It's more money you have to raise. But
So I'm not following your question.
well, I'm just wondering. It sounds like the talent wouldn't work. I don't know if how the budget still drives what talent make. I mean, you could have a $2 million movie and pay another actor, which is below the line, pay above the line actor $3 million if that's what it takes to do it. So how does the budget set in these? You know what I'm saying? Because it seems independent. Film
Right.
costs this.
Seems like it's two
Talent's all above that. Whatever you negotiate.
Right.
So that's why I don't understand how it would. An agent would say, "Oh, it's $2 million budget. I don't care." How does he know what your talent budget is?
Well, because your talent budget is part of your overall. It's part of the overall budget. It's when we do a budget, it's not that we leave above the line blank. We begin with some estimation of what we might want to pay
Okay.
for
That's the
particular
part
roles.
I wasn't clear on. I thought it was
And-
just pure production.
No.
Okay.
You have to
I
put
understand
in
that. Totally
you have
got
to put
it.
in what the writer is going to get, what you might want to pay a director for the film, all the cast roles. You have to put in day player fees, your extras if you need. I mean, you put everything in,
Okay.
and then you begin to maneuver the levers of that budget. Yes, you may have a $5 million film that has a certain kind of appeal where you might be able to pay a actor disproportionate to the budget of the movie.
Right.
An example of that, not in an independent way, is this film that Denzel Washington just made that's premiering here tonight, The Equalizer. That's a $50 million budget, roughly. He got 20.
But wait. I still have to tell you the story about that.
So I just want to finish my point though. So there are disproportions. I'm only using it as a point of saying there are disproportions to budgets. Sometimes based on genre, you may calculate, or that a particular actor is worth that amount to drive even a more modestly budgeted film, because the commercial possibilities that, whether it's pre-sales or the marketability of it, dictates that you're going to be successful in that particular model. That's a rare model, though. The more typical model is one in which the actor's fees are more in line with the scale of the budget that you create, as opposed to being an outsized portion of the budget of that film.
All right. Wait. We get what? 2 questions. Okay.
So the first one is from Joe Guerra, who is asking why is an exit strategy so important to film investors, and what types of documents are needed to encourage an investor to commit money?
Did you hear?
Why is an exit
Why is an
strategy
exit strategy?
so important?
So important, and what types of documents are needed to encourage an investor?
Well, you need the investor documents.
Yeah.
I mean, you need typically you need the LLC, you need the operating agreement, you need the subscription agreement, and because those are the documents that describe what the investor's deal is as it relates to the equity in the film and what the priority of payments and the recoupment level is. So you definitely need the legal documents, which will explain the water flow of the priorities of payments on distribution. Typically, I define recoupment to the investor at greater than 100%, and then after they recoup, there's a 50-50 split. But all those documents explain it.
Okay. Second question: how do you define the legitimacy of a budget when you send it to a producer? So, in other terms, when you receive a budget, how do you they ask? How do you say that it is legitimate budget?
If I can answer
Yeah,
that one,
yeah.
I think that the answer to that is you get legitimate budgets from legitimate people, and so that you legitimate, by that I mean an experienced line producer, particularly experienced with the type of film and the level of film that is being made. But it has to be someone who is experienced, who knows what they're doing, who's actually produced movies, because this is there's no shortcut in this process. This is based on experience, and so a legitimate budget is based on the work of an experienced line producer, and then the collaboration between that line producer and an experienced producer that has a vision for the making of that film.
All right. So is what?
No, that's it. So,
Okay. Any final comments, Kim?
I just wanted to mention that at Entertainment Finance, we are also seeing a trend of A-list talent making cameo appearances in films, because in that way, they don't have to cut their price, for a full role, but they can get paid and they don't have to spend as much time either. So sometimes a cameo appearance can add some value to the marketability of a film. So that's.
Rudy, are there any final comments?
I think that in some, and this is again the experience that Nancy and I are having on this project, there are no shortcuts. I think that's the first thing I said to Nancy when we began, is that there are no shortcuts in this. There is only the hard work that will establish the project from the very beginning. A friend of mine likes to say, "So it begins, so it shall end," and I think that is true of production. That if it begins in a sloppy, haphazard way, then the entire process is going to be that, or you will always be patching. And so I think that the hard work of foundation, which is what development is, must be put in. Story development, a clarity about what the movie is, a real clear sense of the cost of that film, and then the team that is necessary to realize it. But there are no shortcuts. There's only the hard work of producing that gets good things done.
I'd say from both an independent film perspective as well as a documentary perspective, foster your audience along the way. Never forget your audience right through to, as you're developing to actually making it, because you'll need their support when it's finally done to take it, make it successful, or at least help get it out there. So I look at development as it's really your audience development. It's not developing your project.
Nancy, is there any final comment?
I just think it's about following your heart with integrity and with passion and just going for it.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for coming and being part of this. All right.